Just keep putting coffee down here.
My name is TJ Larson, and I'm talking with Lynn Christian in his home here in Ames, February 21st, 2011. Do I have your permission to talk to you today?
Certainly do.
Okay.
Anything we need.
You are known for a distinguished career as a firefighter in Ames, but I want to start back a little bit earlier. You were born in McCallsburg. How did you get to Ames, Iowa?
We farmed out my dad farmed at Milford Township, close to Milford School. And back then, land was going to be $160 an acre. My dad said, I'm not paying $160 an acre. So we moved to town, just a few houses south of where we are now. We moved to town in 1949.
And so you were in the Ames school system then?
Yeah, Roosevelt School. And was in town just a few weeks, got a paper route. Because the folks, you didn't have money, you had to work. And my dad worked for the university. My mother was a paper hanger, self-employed, worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week if possible.
So throughout high school, you probably had jobs.
Yes, yep. I started cooking in the Chicken Dispatch restaurant at 12 years old, a fry cook.
And you couldn't do that now.
No. I cooked on noon hours. I left school and went and worked there on the noon hour and got a sandwich, went back to school, and then during the summer and whenever, I worked fry cooking.
I don't know where that restaurant was.
It's with a triplet just remodeled, and right south across there is a little bitty small building that was John's Vitamins. Yeah.
And it was like a Made-White shop.
Yeah, Wimpy's, it was at one time too there. And so I fry cooked and worked for June Nash, and I told Mary there was sometimes on the weekends, we were open night and day, and if somebody didn't show up, you got to work for 24 hours. It was tickle pink to do it. We worked around the clock and made the money and just was happy to have a job.
When did you graduate from high school in Ames?
59. And previous to that, I had worked at the Coast to Coast store. I was the first DECA student in Ames, and they did somewhere out there's some videos that went to DECA history, and I was putting wagons together and bicycles and sails, and I really liked the sails, and so that at that time my boss was going to California, so then I was hired at Carr Hardware. Worked there for many years.
So for people who don't know what DECA is, that is a program where high school students can be out in the business community and they can shadow business people and learn either, not necessarily trades, but how a business works in a local community.
Yeah, and you actually went to school half day sometimes and worked the other half day.
So after high school then you went to Carr Hardware? Okay. I'm going to stop for just a second about your own personal experience. There were some interesting characters that worked at Carr Hardware. Mr. Schroeder, I believe?
Mr. Schroeder, and Bob Clark was a part of Ames history. He was a really good salesman. He did a lot at the Ikes, trained kids to shoot. He taught me to shoot. Was just worked till he was in his 80s and drove to work, parked out. He was the only one allowed to park out and back because of his age, but everybody knew him. And he was a real loud voice because he had a hearing aid. And classically, because of his age, every Tuesday he took a physic. And so all afternoon he was on the pot. So it was just regular, he just could be, and all afternoon you couldn't find Bob because he was in the basement on the clock. And he was just a one of a kind, a real good one. to bounce back. He had a hearing aid, an old one that had a pack here. And he turned the battery up and down. And he left work to go to a funeral over to Adams and walked over. And he came back and told Art Kettleson, the boss, well, I went to so-and-so's funeral today. And he sang really loud because with his hearing aid. And so he went to the funeral and he said, well, his funeral isn't today. And so he went to the wrong funeral, but he turned his hearing aid down and he come back to Bob and he said, well, I never seen the guy in a suit anyway. And that was the end of it. So he went to the wrong funeral, sat through the whole service, sang and visited and shook hands and came back to work and went to the wrong funeral all day long. Just a real classic guy.
And Carr Hardware, just for people listening to this, was actually on Main Street in 2011. Actually, there was like the Innova that kind of took over that space. So we just so people can picture where it is on the south
It's a
side.
double wide store.
Right, it's on the south side of.
I did a lot of the window displays, and at that time you worked about, I think, 75 hours a week to start.
Whoa! What time did you get there in the morning? What did you do
We
first?
was there at 7:30. We opened at 8, and you worked 6 days a week. And then one day I won some football tickets. I went to a football game with one of the other guys, and I thought, oh my God, some of these people don't work Saturdays. So a while later, then I switched jobs and went to the fire department.
When you were working at Carr Hardware, that's a place where you'd see the entire community. At some time, rich and poor and really well-schooled and not so well-schooled people passed through Carr Hardware. There were lots of different people there.
Yes, and they always just said, charge that to my account. You had to remember everybody's name and write it down. It was all handwritten. They'd grab something, go by the cash register and say, charge that to me, and away they go. So you knew hundreds of people, professors, and at that time, remember Tony's Little Italy? It was down in South Duff. It was a good spaghetti restaurant, but he came in and bought commodes, porcelain commodes to cook his spaghetti in. So none of us ever went there because, they were clean, they were enamelware, but he bought like a dozen commodes at a time, and that's what he made his spaghetti sauce in. So we knew, lots of people, lots of things that happened there. Lots of professors' wives that were like professional shoppers. They had to be there 2-3 days a week. It was just like they had to buy something. That was a good experience. And I did deliveries. Went to Des Moines on some shows. Went to Chicago to trade shows to help buy things with the bosses. And at that time I was in the Army and the Guard, and the boss, Mr. Rogers, would pay you whenever you went to Guard camp. He paid you as well. Besides your vacation, he just came up and paid you in cash. Appreciated your Army service.
So at a hardware store at that time, you said it opened at 8 o'clock in the morning. Were you open pretty late?
We were supposed to close at 5:30 or something, but you never got closed. There was always people there. Always people and calling and wanting something, deliveries after work. And so long hours.
And can you tell me what you got paid an hour when you got out of high school?
I believe I went from about $1 at coast to coast to $1.15 or something. It was a big bump, a nice bump. Enough to, get you in a car and there was a lot of money. So you worked all the hours you could. And then I worked besides pumping gas at a station on the side. And I used to wax and clean cars on the side. So anything to make $1,
So when you're working at Carr Hardware and you start as a high school, well, after Coast to Coast, was it been 1950 then you started Carr Hardware?
No, it would be 60.
60. So okay. So we were talking about characters that I had mentioned to Mr. Schrader, I believe.
Schroeder.
Yeah.
Yeah, he lived over in Curtis, and him and his wife traveled a lot. They inherited a couple of farms, so he had the money there. And so he took extra time without pay to be able to travel.
Mhm.
And he was a coin collector, real smart guy, but he just couldn't keep his hands off the girls, and nothing ever happened, you know. They never let him go. He just finally retired because of it. And at that time, one of the guys on the fire department, Gerald Swenson, came in, and he worked at the fire department, and then he worked at Carr Hardware the other days. So him and I became very, very close friends. We're going to get into farmland together, and we bought a house at 613 6th that belonged to Red Abbott, who was a real part of Ames history, a real character. And it was an old condemned house, and we were going to start with houses and make duplexes and work together. And then we just got into that house and started, and he got cancer. And so he passed away young, and then I ended up remodeling that house and living there. But it was an old condemned house. Took me 2 years to get the remodeling done, working. And so I lived there and rented to Helen Soy that lived there for maybe 15 years in a little bitty apartment.
Mhm.
And then I ended up buying the house next door, which was Carl Wilson. And that's when I liked the remodeling work. And
But Carl Wilson was kind of a character.
yes, he was noted for riding his bicycle all over town in his 80s. And he shook. He had Parkinson's. So when he rode a bicycle, he'd come down the road shaking like this. And people were, oh my God, he's going to fall over. But he rode all over. And he finally was going bowling one day on his bicycle and hit a pothole and broke his hip. He was on the way going bowling at 85 some years old and broke his hip. So his bicycle in days were ending. But I ended up taking care of him because he had no family. Even when he ended up in the nursing home, I went 7 days a week to see him, got his clothes, took care of him.
And Carl Wilson's job, or what brought him to Ames?
He had worked for the DOT, and then he worked right away for the wrecker at Earl's Garage, which used to be on South Kellogg. And he worked nights. He would work all night and sleep on the couch and do the wrecker calls. And everybody knew him. He was he just pulled everybody out of the ditch and had some bad wrecks, and nothing seemed to bother him. Worked 7 days a week.
Maybe that's why he rode a bicycle. He knew what happened to people who
Yeah,
drive
I
cars.
think so. Yeah, he did have a bad one that he talked around down that somebody got hurt bad by the post office. And he had to pull one car out, and a lady was hurt bad, and he did talk a little bit about it. But yeah, I think that was about when he quit driving wrecker, and he rode bikes all over.
One other town character that I hear mentioned is a woman's name, Sylvia. Do you know who she is?
Yes, indeed. Yep. And that one that was Bob Schroeder, and she did come in the store. She was pleasant. Nobody, I don't think, really picked on her. They knew what she did.
And what did she look like?
She was attractive, lean, skinny, clean. And I remember from when I worked at the Chicken Dispatch restaurant, because she would always kind of sit in the back corner, and I remember her smoking a cigar. And women never smoked cigars. And I'm not even sure if they were hers or if she took them out of an ashtray or what, because we had a window where all the orders came in, and she would sit back there, and I remember her smoking cigars.
But she was a lady of the night, so to speak.
She would be down around the bus depot a lot, just walked all over town, up and down Main Street. It was clean looking.
But you were working in Carr Hardware when she came in once.
More than once, yeah. That's when she come in and wanted the money from Bob Schroeder. And she actually took her shoes off, chased him with those heels, yelled, screamed about her money and chased him down the basement, up the stairs, and all over that store. And he finally went out the back door, and our boss got in between. And I don't know, I'm sure he had to pay up, or his wife was going to find out. And it was a classic. She just screamed and yelled and called him by name. And I don't believe she cussed or anything like that. She just yelled.
And where did Sylvia live?
She just lived a few doors from Carr Hardware above Ollie's store and had a nice apartment up there for quite a few years.
It was kind of a one. In addition to a living space, I guess it was also a business space,
It was
so to
business
speak.
space. People, yep, people were known, but yep.
Well, let's move on to when you worked for the fire department. When did you join up with the city fire department?
1970, 69 actually.
69?
1969.
Yeah. Well, when is 69 did you join?
Would have been, I believe, May.
May.
Yeah.
So you would have been on the fire department when the main office was at Kellogg and 6th Street, 56th Street, where YSS is.
YSS.
And there was a new fire station out in West Ames. It wasn't not that far west. It was in Campustown.
And Welch.
Right. I think something big in November of '69 happened out there next to that fire
That's
station.
when they were stupidly digging right next door. The wall caved in. Part of the fire station did come down too, because one of the beams came on one of my friend's head, and it could have just been the end of him. He was just glazed and he was hurt pretty bad, Jim Hoffman. But he did come back to work, and there was lots of damage, some to the trucks, and it was just as dumb as you could be to be digging right beside. And so it caved in, and then that was the bar, and that's how they named it the cave-in. It was there for years.
You probably tell me what it was like. Not the dramatic fires. What was an ordinary day like for a firefighter in 1970? What were your shifts like?
Our shifts were lots of fun, because back then you didn't have a fire every day maybe. You may have went 3 times, and then you might go 2 or 3 shifts without going out. So by then you get a little gun shy if you haven't been out. So I'm not a card player, but a lot of them played cards. We pitched pennies. We did ornery tricks on people. We would go into the bathroom in the middle of the night sometimes and put saran wrap over the stool, so the next one to come in would sit down and there was saran wrap on it. And just things that were ornery, you know. And there used to be a meter maid, and Skippy they called her. She worked for the city for many years. And we would go out in our front driveway and glue quarters on the sidewalk before she'd come to work. And she'd been on it over and over again. She'd be down trying to get that quarter out the concrete, and we glued it to the concrete. And so we would, at that time, then you could wash your car and pull your car in, wash and wax. We helped each other. And maybe if somebody was remodeling at home or painting, everybody kind of jumped in and helped each other work. And so it was a lot different than it is now. Now they go out 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day, and we did not have that.
How did you get the job?
They had an opening. I looked at the post office, but that job would have been part-time, and Mr. Penny was the postmaster, and he said, well, you'll get full-time, you just got to start, and I just didn't have the patience. So they had a fire department, and I'd known Gerald Swenson, and he'd always said that's the thing to do. And basically, if you pass the test because of the income and the hours, they interviewed you, you got the job.
So were they expanding the fire department at that time?
No, they had a little turnover. One
They
of the
had some
guys
turnover,
had
okay.
was going to be leaving that had MS at that time. And was losing his strength.
There was a huge fire out in the country in January of 1970.
Yeah,
It was at the Black Sea
black
Corn?
seed corn. Yeah.
Were you called to that?
I was driving and we turned south on Beach and Blacks was a few miles south and there was nothing but a big red glow all the way from Beach and so.
What time of day was it?
No, I think it was the middle of the night,
Okay.
midnight type of thing. And so it was, oh my God, so we called for the tanker truck which would haul the water because we only had 500 gallons of water. And so I was inside that fire with my friend Larry Groves. I was new, he was more experienced. We were way back in there, maybe 50 or 100 feet, trying to get to the source of the fire. And our new fire chief fiddled with the fire truck and turned our pressure down. So we got back in there, didn't have any water to speak of, and this was the chief that did this. And as we were clear to the back, it blew up. And so as we were standing right beside 4x4s and everything, they instantly were on fire. And so Larry was more experienced, and I got a bear hug on him. And what you do is you follow your fire hose back out of the fire to get out. And I had a bear hug on him. And by the time we got out, the back of my coat was burnt off, and my ears were burnt. His ears were burnt, and we just a very close call, really close call.
Wow. Wow.
So they started hauling water, but we couldn't save much. It was a metal building.
How did it start?
They don't know. It was one of those whoops chemicals type of thing. There was lots of chemicals in there when it blew up. Gasoline and oil.
Wow.
So it was scary, and not at the time, but afterwards, you know.
You stayed on. You stayed on. After that, you had barely been on for 6 months, and
I had house payments, car payments, and liked the job. But when you really liked the job, at that time you went inside to put the fires out.
Now, what was the theory about that at that time?
Get to the source of the fire.
I see.
You go in. If it's a couch way to the back or in the basement, you just didn't spray water. You went in and to the source of the fire.
And they don't do that now then?
Not as much. They do, but we didn't use masks. You just went in without any masks on. Seldom did we ever use an air pack or mask.
Well, then I think it was in the spring of that year, you were a pit crew at the Indianapolis 500. This is quite a year for you.
Went to the pit crew at 500, had a couple of days there, and worked in the pits. That year they were going about 210 miles an hour.
Any crashes?
Lots of crashes, and our driver, his name was Mears, I believe, drove with a hook. One of his arms was bad, so he had a hook on his steering wheel. But the car, something went bad, and the steering got to shaking so bad that it put his arm to sleep. And so he had to come in, and we were still firefighters for the rest of the day, but we lost our particular car that we had.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And on the way home, a friend of mine that was a car salesman had a brand new Chevrolet, and we were drinking beer and started home, and the first thing we did over in the Quad Cities was rear-end a car, got in a terrible car wreck, totaled out his new car that belonged to George Wright Chevrolet. Luckily we didn't get in trouble, but we had to get a rent-a-car to get home. And and luckily now you would go to jail because we'd been drinking beer, you know, and we hadn't slept for a couple of days either. And so it was a real fun time. I was invited to go back the next year, but didn't go back.
So continuing on in 1970, this is kind of the event that I learned more about you because of reading the newspapers at Ames Historical Society. But also in the spring of 1970, I think it was maybe April, there was a bomb blast at the City Hall.
It was May 22nd.
May, okay.
And that was about the time at Kent State with all the riots, and we'd had a few threats, but then the police didn't take them serious, we didn't take them serious, and actually the fire chief at that time seen the guy right outside the back didn't pay any attention, came in, went to work,
Mm.
and about 9 o'clock, the horrendous blast, and it, I was in line with a great big door that went down to the jail, and when that door blew off, it took me with it, partway across the room into a truck. It hurt my back at the time,
Wow.
and we kept on working that day, and it was just the noise was incredible.
Go ahead, Mary.
No, I want him. They don't use dynamite now, but that's what it was. It was a dynamite explosion. And he said that he worked with somebody named Yogi, and Yogi said, that's dynamite.
Yeah, and Yogi was my officer, a
Mhm.
very, very smart guy, and he was underneath the truck cleaning, and he instantly said, that's dynamite.
Mm.
And of course everything was, the windows were all broke out, there was glass everywhere. It broke out lots of windows on Main Street and everywhere
Mhm.
too on there. And some of them, there was a lot of injuries,
Mhm.
lots of people hurt with glass.
So, just as a hero would do, you just got up and you went back to work and you were looking for anybody else, and there was somebody who was badly injured.
Yeah, there was a guy that was in jail that was in for intoxication.
Mm-hmm.
And the jail was in the basement. So Yogi and I believe, were the first ones down there because the police station was in the basement too. But they were hurt, some of the police were, and he was in the jail. And they opened it, and he actually had a coat hanger into his throat that could have been into, a jugular vein, but it wasn't. And at that time, his face was all black because the dynamite was real close to him. They put it in a window well.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about 12 sticks. And if they would have put even a newspaper over the top of that dynamite, it would have leveled the building. They just didn't know quite what they were doing. It was a Black Panther bunch that was radicals. And so Yogi and I got down, and at that time we got him on a stretcher. He looked so bad. We knew he was alive, but he was black. So as we took him out of the steps, well, I covered his face up and just relaxed. But then everybody got a rumor that this guy was dead, and it went all over Ames that there was a death there, that there was lots of injuries.
Mm-hmm.
We all kept working. We just still had to be on call. And we didn't know if there would be any more explosions because they were out at campus doing protests.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kept on working. Everybody off duty came in that could and helped,
Mm-hmm.
and tried to get things back to order again.
I mean, the very first step is to sweep up the glass. I mean,
Yeah,
you just have
glass over. I had glass in my knee, lots of glass in one of my knees,
Mhm.
and just cleaned it out and put my boots on back. And if I would have been a foot or two either way, the door wouldn't have hit me, and I wouldn't have been injured. But that was a day that we were cleaning brass, and we had the pole that you slid, and you always polished the pole that day. And so
Mhm.
we were cleaning, and
Was there anybody on the fire force that was not injured?
basically, no, I was the only one that was hurt very bad.
Okay.
Yeah, there was probably some cuts.
Cuts.
in hands
Everybody
and
had cuts,
stuff.
but you were the
Only one that was.
you
got-
took it for the team.
Yeah, for the door. It was a big, heavy wood door that protected the jail,
Mhm.
and it was well secured, and it blew it right off the hinges.
Mm. And the police officers were pretty
Yeah,
badly hurt too.
some that lost hearing
Mm-hmm.
because of the noise that was real close, Eldon Hand, and he retired with hearing loss. And there was a trooper there that had bad cuts in the back, and the meter maid, one of the meter
Mhm.
maids got hurt real bad.
Mm-hmm.
So there was quite a few that went to the hospital. I didn't go to the hospital till later.
Mm-hmm. The hospital, you mentioned the hospital, made me think of it. About the years of 1969, 1970 hospital was acquiring property, and there were plans for expansion of Mary
Mhm.
Greeley Medical I think it was a hospital still. I don't think they were starting to call it the medical center.
Yeah, hospital then.
So there were lots of houses surrounding the hospital. What did the fire department do with those?
We burnt every single one as a training fire. And we would get them completely involved. I have quite a few pictures. And we would go in over and over, put the fire out, get it going again, just train and train. In fact, one of them, we were going up the steps with the assistant chief, with 3 of us, and as we went up the steps, the chimney caved in and dropped on all 3 of us, covered with bricks. And the assistant chief says, "You don't go out. This would be like anything else, you stayed with it." So we cleaned off, we didn't have masks on or anything, and went on to the 2nd floor and put the fire completely out. But it was a real close call again, because the bricks were on top of all of us.
But I understand his point. He was like, this is training.
This is training, this is what you do.
This is what you
don't back
do.
out. And we were all new, most of the new guys were doing it. And we had back then, the Buffalo was a big, long truck that was stored out to the campus they didn't hardly use. And the chief said, they pulled it up in front and put me in there and said, "Take that truck up there and set it up." And I didn't know how to pump it, I didn't know how to shift it or drive it or anything. It was huge. And I was in that big truck and got it up there and finally got it parked and never did figure out the pump, had to get help. And we used the old reserve truck to pump. But that was my first driving experience. And then we had an old rural truck that was really hard to shift. And 90% of the people working there couldn't drive it. And for some dumb reason, I was able to start driving it, shift it, and it just fell together for me. So I ended up driving the city truck and the rural truck. So you had a lot more to learn. You had all your city streets, and then all your rural addresses. And when you went to the country, you only went with 2 people. You had a big house fire, it was just the officer and the driver. So you really got worked out. Or a big grass fire, something like that. You only had 2 people. It was hard work.
You didn't have GPS.
No,
You.
no. You learned to know the farmers' names. So if Farmer Jones called in and said the tracks are on fire again, you knew about where you were going to go and where your limits were. And so you worked. We had a couple of house fires up by Gilbert that were set, and we think the owner set them, and we crawled, Boyd and I crawled in that one trying to get to it, and there was a big hole in the floor, and both of us were within inches. The floor started to settle, and we were crawling in, and we backed out just as careful as could be, and we weren't able to save anything. And we think the owner set it with no proof to it. Another very, very close call, just about dropped in the basement.
You must have had an angel on your shoulder from time to time.
I have. I've been really lucky, and lots of close fires
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. I know you were not personally involved with this incident, but I know just from having read newspapers at the Ames Historical Society that in 1972 there was a fire truck that collided with a car on Beach Avenue. And can you tell me, about this truck, or can you tell me a little
That was
bit
the
about
truck that I drove most of the time, the rural truck that was hard to drive.
that? Where was the truck headed at the time?
It was headed to West Ames, outside of town, and had lights and siren going, and a fellow pulled right out in front of him that was older, and he had turned his hearing aid off, so he did not hear. And at that time we didn't have as good a lights and sirens like they have now. They were still adequate, but he actually kind of just pulled right in front of the truck and was killed. It was real hard on him. And so we had the drivers had court cases and lawsuits, and at that time the city was not real good to take care of the drivers. Finally it was all cleared, but it took a long time.
I bet that would be hard for the firefighters as a team. You would feel it would just be hard, So
Yeah.
you were trying to do something right, and it didn't work
You
out
knew
right.
they were right,
Mhm.
because I knew the driver was one of the better drivers,
Mhm.
and it was an accident, and that's
Mhm.
what it meant to be. And he was probably one of the better drivers, and it was just couldn't be happening. He just pulled right in front of him.
Mhm.
So everybody on the department backed him,
Mhm.
and if he needed any testifying or anything, but it went on for quite a while, and the truck was totaled out.
Mhm. And I'm not sure when this fire was, but there was one on Lincoln Way, just west of Franklin, on the north side, maybe 2 or 3 businesses down. That was kind of a big fire there.
Yeah, it was Scotty's. Yeah,
It's
that
Scotty's,
was
that's
a
it.
restaurant, had a lot of grease and everything that took off,
Mm-hmm.
and
And what year was this? Can you help me out?
72, I
72?
think. Yeah. In fact, we pulled in there, and we had probably a dozen people working on that one, because it just wasn't gonna go out.
Mhm.
In fact, the fellow that owned this house was Don Weiser, and he was
Music.
Yes, up on the roof, and the beams gave way, and he was straddling on one of the beams up there,
Mm.
and they had to rescue him with a ladder,
Mhm.
and he was kind of a friend of mine, and I ended up buying this house from him,
Mhm.
and he was a carpenter, and this house was a duplex at that
Mhm.
time. And so it was a nasty fire because of all the grease, and it was
Mhm.
back then the restaurants weren't as clean by a long ways, and so it just was fire, and it just kept erupting, and so
Mhm.
it wasn't much saved there.
Well, I've kind of been talking about events in the early 1970s, because that's kind of when you started on the fire force. Any long-time members on your fire force ever talk about the fire at what I recall the restaurant bar was called Genuine John's, south of the tracks on Kellogg?
No, and I was not around, evidently. I think I was out of town or something,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the fellows actually fell off the fire escape there and got hurt, and I think eventually the trauma, he retired because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not a well-managed fire. There just wasn't enough people for as bad a fire as it was. A lot of contents again,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was just
By contents, you mean there was just a lot of
a
flammable...
lot of flammable stuff in the
Stuff.
booths and everything.
Right.
And it's one of those that a lot of people could have got hurt again real easily.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, a little luck came through. But it was a bad fire, and it was just, once it got into the roof and stuff, was not controllable. So the guys that worked on it were stuck there a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And back then you didn't have the relief. Now they work a few hours and they bring new help in and get them warmed up and whatever. But then you just stayed right with it. So.
There was a fraternity fire. This might have been after your time on the force. It was, I think it's called, colloquially, it's called the Fiji House, or the Phi Gamma Delta House on the
Mhm.
corner of Ash and Knapp. Were
Yeah.
you on the
I
force then?
wasn't there, but my good friend that I have coffee with all the time was there, and they planted him on a big 2.5-inch hose in the corner because the aerial truck got froze up. Again, there was not a lot of people. The weather was terrible, and when they started slowing down, he'd been there for hours. He was actually froze to the ground. Ron Gibb was my friend, yeah. They had to just pry him loose because he was into this hose, and all the mist had come back, and he was completely froze to the ground to get him, because they'd just been there for hours.
There was a picture that I had seen of that, and it is completely just covered with icicles. I don't know if you had seen that picture or
Yeah.
not.
And so they would take some of the firefighters in next door and try and warm them up a little bit, but them guys just, it was, and the aerial truck froze, so they had to drive the truck back to the city warehouse with the 100-foot aerial sticking out and try and get it back and thawed without damaging it. But yeah, them guys really had a terrible workout. Well, I was not.
Mhm.
That was when they were.
Can you think of any other you were on the force from 1960, or 60, I'm sorry, 1970 to,
69 to 75.
okay, 75.
And I had back surgery,
Mhm.
and so I retired with a back injury from the bombing.
Yeah.
I didn't get surgery right away. Actually had 2 surgeries. The first one was not successful at all.
Mhm.
So as soon as they could, they went back in and did another back surgery and did some more work, but I'd lost my leg reflexes and stuff. So
Mhm.
I retired because of the injury.
Mhm. Well, thank you for your service to
No,
the
it
city
was,
of Ames.
everybody that worked then, and the guys now, they really have smart people on there now. We were more gunners, I would say. We were inside, you weren't scared of nothing. We had fires in basements with motorcycles and gasoline that could have went up. I was in a basement over on Lincoln Way all by myself. There was only 2 of us one day. And I kept spraying the red fire. The red fire just moved around. I couldn't get enough hose. And the fire was in the other room, and that was just a red curtain. I kept hitting the curtain over and over again, and the fire was in the other room until it broke out a window, and then I was able to find it. But there was only 2 of us that day on that fire. One guy on the truck and sent me in the basement. So there was lots of small ones that could have been. We had a lot of mobile homes in Old Orchard that we were kind of, I think we were number 2 station. We were really fast to go across country club and get out there, and we were really quick to get and save some property. And we would beat this downtown station in at that time, working at the college. And you knew all your streets, all your hydrants. And more than one time, we've had cars that would park in front of a fire hydrant, and we just dragged the hose over their car. It damaged their car, whatever. They were wrong, we were right. And they got tickets, and we had to get to the fire hydrant.
Absolutely.
So more than one time, I remember that one was Highland and somewhere out there, and we just dragged the hoses right over the top of the car, and had to be done.
Well, I want to thank you very much for letting me come into your home and visit
great.
with you today. Maybe we might have another chance to talk another time if
Okay.
you're up to it.
And part of Ames history, I think Rosie can tell you more characters, more restaurants. She's got a memory that's incredible.
Just contribute anything worthwhile.
We've had several people sit with us in the kitchen here at the Christian household, and with Lynn, who has been talking about firefighting, is Rosie Stevens Nelson, and Rosie's sister was in school with Lynn. Is that right?
Same grade.
Same grade. Well, tell us about high school then.
She was a lifesaver probably to me. I don't know. She always seemed to bail me out for tests because I was not as attentive as should be. And homework was a 4-letter word because I was working. I couldn't wait to go to work and make some money and get a car, whatever you needed. And so Rosie remembers more restaurants.
So Rosie,
and
he
stuff.
liked cars, huh?
Oh, he loved cars, and he loved to display it on Main Street, up and down, and then all the girls walked. Well, not with. Just by ourselves. But these notes that they used to pass back and forth with my sister, she saved them. And when I got, I worked with Mary at Mary Greeley, and when I found out who she was married to, I told my sister, and she sent all these notes to me to give to Mary. And Mary brought him home and put him on his dinner plate.
From high school,
From
all
high
them years
school,
she saved
yeah.
them. And she was in where, Florida then?
Yeah, yeah, she
Living
was
in
in
Florida.
Florida. But we have had more laughs over.
So you like cars, Lynn?
I liked my cars, and then I would buy and sell cars as a kid, shine them up, clean them up, try and paint them a little bit, and resold cars. And one year then the state of Iowa come knocking on my door and said, you can't do that unless you have a license. You had 16 cars this year and we have record of them. And if you want to have a dealer's license, you have to have a showroom, and they kind of cramped my style. I was buying and selling cars at my mother's house and would clean them. And if you made $20, that was a good profit. So it was awesome.
You know, today is I've always wondered where you found enough money to keep that much wax on those cars. Carr Hardware, now I know.
Yeah.
But it was worth
And-
your money.
So both of you have worked at some of the same restaurants. Yes? Did I understand that right?
She knew people from
Chicken Dispatch.
Chicken Dispatch,
Yeah, June
Tristan,
Nash.
June, and she knew everybody. She knew some of the workers' names that I had forgotten, and she just rings a bell once in a while, and I just don't have the memory. But a few of them, the Beehive out to the college, and some, they were really small. And what was Larry Nye's restaurant on Main Street? Larry Nye had that one by Joe's Men Shop. You remember that? A little bitty one, little itty bitty restaurant where you just stood up
I can't remember.
to get in, and maybe there was 10 places to sit.
Well, the Chicken Dispatch was much bigger
Chicken
than
Dispatch,
that.
well, the first Chicken Dispatch was a real small one.
Yeah.
And then the one that I cooked at, we actually sat about 40-some people. Because you had to remember all the orders. They didn't write them down. They just yelled them to you.
Yeah.
So you might have a hamburger steak and eggs and potatoes going, but they didn't write them down, the girls that worked there. But Rosie remembers names and more restaurants and
Rosie, what were some of the restaurants you worked at?
Hamburger in the Rough, Sovereign Grill, Dick and Eva's.
oh yes.
They were all big
Let's-
jiving restaurants, yeah.
Let's start at
Hamburger
the
in
top.
Rough was.
Yeah, let's talk about Hamburger in the Rock. Where was that?
Well, it's where the credit union is now. It was called the Lucky G, but they had car hops. That was that and the A&W is about the only ones that ever had that service, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Remember Bob Garland gave me my first job when I was 12 years old, and paid me well.
And where was this when you were 12? Where did you work?
That was at, well, I worked at Sovereign Grill when I was 12 before I started at Lucky G. But I got fired at Sovereign Grill because I dropped a tray of glasses. And Herb Hunsinger was the owner of that, so it was hit the road. So then Bob Garland heard about me. He felt sorry for me for getting such a scolding. So then I started working for Bob and babysit for him, and they were just understanding people then. Now you're just a number. And so it was fun, but I think I'm so glad I was a female and get a waitress job. I would never have made a fireman. Realize what all you went through.
I guess they call it the good old days.